Before you judge this message, understand this. If you've ever lost your peace because of someone else's behavior, you are not weak, but you are exposed. And today, I'm going to show you something most people never realize until it's too late. Because the person who frustrates you, disrespects you, or drains you is not the real problem. The real problem is the invisible control you've given them over your mind. Think about the last time someone pushed your buttons. Notice how fast your mood changed, how your body tightened, how your thoughts spiraled. That moment wasn't random. It was a transfer of power. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. Most people spend their lives trying to fix difficult people, argue with them, explain themselves to them, or prove something to them, and they stay stuck, exhausted, and confused. But what if the strongest move you could make had nothing to do with changing them at all? What if the moment you stopped reacting, everything shifted? This video isn't about being passive. It's not about staying quiet or letting people walk over you. It's about mastering the one skill that makes you untouchable in any room, emotional control. Because once you understand how power actually moves in conversations, conflicts, and relationships, you stop bleeding energy into situations that were never meant to be won. By the end of this video, you'll see difficult people differently, you'll hear their words differently, and more importantly, you'll see yourself differently. Not as someone who needs to defend, explain, or prove, but as someone who chooses when to engage in, when to rise above. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn doesn't just change how you deal with difficult people, it changes who has control over your life. Let's slow this down and look at what's really happening in the moment you feel triggered by a difficult person. Before words are exchanged, before tone rises, before the situation escalates, something far more important has already occurred. Your nervous system has been activated. And once that happens, most people stop thinking and start reacting. This is the exact moment where power is either claimed or surrendered. Understand this clearly. Difficult people don't control you with their words. They control you by pulling you into a reactive state. When you react, you are no longer choosing your response. You are being driven by impulse, emotion, and the need to defend your identity. That is not strength. That is exposure. Self-control is not silence for the sake of avoidance. It is restraint for the sake of clarity. The ability to pause, to breathe, to let the emotional surge pass before you speak. That is not passive behavior. That is disciplined authority. Most people speak because they feel uncomfortable with tension. Strong people can sit inside tension without needing to resolve it immediately when someone interrupts you, disrespects you, or challenges you in a way that feels personal. Your mind immediately looks for one thing: relief. And reaction feels like relief. Raising your voice feels like relief. Explaining yourself feels like relief. Proving them wrong feels like relief. But relief is short-term, and short-term relief almost always creates long-term damage. Difficult people count on this. They are not skilled communicators, but they are skilled instigators. They know that if they can provoke an emotional reaction, they gain leverage. The conversation stops being about truth, boundaries, or solutions and becomes about emotional dominance. Whoever is calmer holds the advantage. Whoever reacts first loses it. This is why composure is so unsettling to difficult people. Calmness removes their fuel. When you don't react the way they expect, their script collapses. They push harder, speak louder, become more erratic, not because you are losing, but because they are. Chaos escalates when control slips away. You must understand the philosophy beneath this. Your reaction is a form of permission. Every emotional outburst teaches people how to treat you. Every defensive explanation tells them you can be pressured. Every visible frustration signals vulnerability. Difficult people observe these signals closely, even if unconsciously. Control your reaction, and you control the dynamic. This doesn't mean you suppress emotion. Suppression is denial, and denial always leaks. It means you regulate emotion. Regulation is awareness. You notice the surge. You name it internally. You allow it to pass without acting on it. That pause, even a few seconds, creates space between stimulus and response. And inside that space lives your freedom. Think about the people you respect the most. Not the loudest, not the most aggressive, but the ones who remain steady under pressure. They speak slower when others speed up. They lower their voice when others raise theirs. Their presence alone de-escalates the room. That is not accidental. That is mastery. Difficult people want to pull you into urgency. Urgency forces mistakes. Calmness forces reflection. When you respond instead of react, you shift the interaction from emotional to rational. And most difficult people cannot survive in rational territory. There is also a deeper layer here that few people talk about. When you react emotionally, you tie your self-worth to someone else's behavior. You are saying without words, you have the power to disturb my inner state. That is a dangerous contract to sign. Inner stability is not built by controlling others. It is built by controlling yourself. You do not need to correct every false statement. You do not need to defend every accusation. You do not need to participate in every argument you are invited to. Silence, when chosen intentionally, is not submission. It is discernment. Some of the strongest responses you will ever give contain very few words. A calm "I disagree" delivered without emotion is more powerful than a 5-minute explanation soaked in frustration. A composed pause before answering communicates more confidence than immediate justification ever could. And here is something that will change how you see conflict. Emotional reactions often come from ego, not truth. The ego wants to be right. The ego wants to be respected. The ego wants to win. But the ego is impatient and fragile. When you let ego drive your response, you lose strategic control. When you let principle drive your response, you gain it. This is why self-control is not about being nice, it is about being precise. You choose your words like tools, not weapons. You respond only when it serves your long-term position, not your short-term feelings. The moment you stop reacting, people notice, conversations change, power dynamics shift. Some people will respect you more, some will feel exposed, and some will quietly remove themselves from your life because they no longer have access to your emotional buttons. That is not loss, that is alignment. The world is full of difficult people. You will not eliminate them, but you can eliminate their influence over you. And that begins with mastering your reaction. Because the strongest person in the room is not the one who speaks the most. It is the one who can feel everything and still choose wisely what to do. Next, once you learn to control your reaction, the next shift is even more uncomfortable for most people. You stop explaining yourself. And this is where real authority begins, because explanation is often mistaken for clarity, when in reality, it is usually a response to pressure. People don't over-explain because they are thoughtful. They over-explain because they feel threatened, misunderstood, or afraid of being seen as unreasonable. Difficult people rely on this instinct. They push, question, interrupt, and challenge, not because they want understanding, but because they want access. Every extra sentence you offer becomes material they can twist, question, or use against you. The more you explain, the more room you give them to negotiate your boundaries. A boundary is not a debate. It is a declaration. When you say yes while feeling no, you teach people that your comfort is flexible. When you tolerate disrespect in the name of peace, you teach people that your dignity is negotiable. And once someone learns that your limits move under pressure, they will keep pushing until they find the edge again. This is why difficult people dislike boundaries. Boundaries remove confusion. They remove emotional leverage. They force accountability. And most importantly, they reveal character. When someone reacts negatively to a calm, reasonable boundary, they are not reacting to the boundary itself. They are reacting to the loss of control. You do not need a perfect explanation or your limits. You need conviction. Think about how often people say, "I just want them to understand." But understanding is not required for respect. Agreement is not required for compliance. You can be calm, kind, and firm at the same time. And when you stop chasing understanding, something powerful happens. You stop placing your emotional safety in someone else's hands. Clear boundaries sound simple, but they are emotionally demanding. They require you to tolerate discomfort, silence, disapproval, misinterpretation. Difficult people will often accuse you of being cold, selfish, or unreasonable the moment you stop over-explaining. That accusation is not a diagnosis. It is a tactic. When you explain yourself excessively, you are trying to manage how others feel about your decision. When you set a boundary without explanation, you are accepting that their feelings are their responsibility. This is psychological maturity. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They allow what is healthy to remain and what is harmful to fall away. And you don't build filters by negotiating with toxins. You build them by being consistent. Consistency is what gives boundaries their strength, not volume, not emotion, not justification, just repetition. Calm, steady repetition. You say it once, clearly, respectfully, without apology, and if it's challenged, you don't escalate. You repeat it. Most people think boundaries fail because they were not strong enough. In reality, they fail because they were not enforced. Difficult people test limits the way children test rules, not because they don't hear you, but because they want to see if you mean it. And here is where many people break. They confuse kindness with flexibility. They soften the boundary to avoid tension. They add explanations to smooth discomfort. They retreat when faced with resistance.